Welcome to Babblecom 5. This is episode 5 of Crusade by the DVD play order, Patterns of the Soul. So this is quite an interesting one in the sense that it's actually on topic for Crusade. It's actually about the Drac Plague, give or take. So basically it seems that Gideon was en route to quite a promising planet, but he's been pulled away from that by General Thompson, who apparently has got clearance from President Sheridan, no less, to go after a chap called Robert Black, who is leading a small group of colonists to a planet called Theta 49. And the concern is that they left Earth just about the same time as the Drac were assaulting the planet and spreading the plague. So there is a question mark over whether or not they might be infected by the plague. So it seems that Gideon is getting tasked to go and investigate what the state of play is with them and to take the necessary steps if they have been infected. In the meantime, Alison is getting chased by his IPX employers, who are basically saying, why aren't you reporting into us and giving us lots of juicy information about the various planets that you're investigating as part of your mission to cure the Drac Plague. And it does seem rather odd because he doesn't seem to have submitted anything to them, so it's no wonder they're chasing him. And of course he's now disappointed because he discovers that they've been taken away from a planet that he thought was going to be promising from an IPX point of view. So we learn that about 30 colonists escaped from Earth, and we see that one of them is meeting with a sort of a hooded figure on the planet who is saying that the stones aren't telling him anything, which implies that his people are now doomed because of the arrival of the Terrans to his planet. We'll later find out that the Terran is in fact Robert Black himself, who's speaking to this unknown figure in the hood, who seems to be quite old, and he's not really sure what to make of this guy's prognosis that his people have been doomed by their arrival, because at this point he doesn't know that he's whether or not he's infected by the plague. It's not really something that's even on his radar, it seems. So there's immediately a sort of a question mark going into the episode as to what the state of play is. And we see for the first time in quite a while, in this particular play order anyway, Dr. Sarah Chambers. I can't actually remember the last time we saw her on screen outside of the intro. So she's in this episode a fair bit, and we're introduced to this nanovirus shield. Now, I seem to remember when I originally watched the series that this was actually the first episode, and I think this probably confused me at the time, or perhaps didn't, because I just assumed this was something that they had available to them generally, and it gives them protection from infection by the Drac Plague for a duration of 48 hours. So if you ingest anything, it probably won't protect you, but if you just breathe it in, it should give you protection against it for 48 hours. I think they actually picked this up in another episode, which we haven't yet seen in the DVD play order. So I suspect that the other play orders fixed this so that they have got this temporary solution earlier. And this does make perfect sense because, of course, there is this risk that they will go to places where the plague or something similar to it has already been deployed, or people have already been infected by it and have somehow got off Earth. And that's obviously the latter is the case here. So, of course, they would need to prevent themselves getting infected by it, otherwise they'll be on the same clock as everyone else, and the entire crew of the Excalibur obviously would then get exposed to the virus, which they obviously don't want to happen. So it does make perfect sense that one of the things that would be useful to pick up is a mode of protecting themselves from it without having to go in with sort of full hazmat suits on. So it seems that the second in command of the colonists, who we later learn is called Tim, he seems to be saying that the colonists left Earth wanting a sort of a steadier pace of life, basically, that they felt things were going too quickly and they just wanted to break away and form their own colony and just be left alone. That seems to be the sort of the general gist of it. So there's a general sort of debate going on between him and Robert Black about whether or not they should accede to Earth Force's wishes and allow themselves to be investigated, or whether they should put some sort of resistance. But Black is basically suggesting that they should just cooperate for now, at least, because that's probably the path of least resistance for them, and it might result in them just being left alone, which is what they're after. So Dorina now finds the old hooded figure who Black was earlier speaking with, and he says that twilight is turning to night for him, and she says that her people have a similar belief. And he sort of fumbles with his hood, and she helps him take it down, and she realizes that in fact he is one of her people. And the thing is that all of her people, as far as she knew, are dead, because her homeworld, as we learned in Call to Arms, was taken out by the Shadows during the Shadow War, so all her people are gone. But it seems that somehow he has survived. So he directs her to another location, which she goes off to investigate. Black seems to accept what Gideon is telling him about the possibility that they might be infected by the plague. But Tim suggests that, not to Gideon, but a comment he makes suggests that they're hiding something besides the possible infection, so that maybe there's some other reason why the group might have left Earth beyond the sort of the colonization mission. So there's sort of a question mark there. But one thing is clear, and that is that they do not want to go back to Earth. So that is clearly something that they are trying to avoid, possibly at all costs. So Dorina, having gone off completely solo and climbed a cliff completely solo, as she does, finds a larger group of her people up on the top of the cliff. And they appear to be indigenous. And she actually calls Dr. Chambers to come down and have a look at them to investigate their health. And Eilson has sort of noted that where this call has come from, and he's sort of interested in the fact that, obviously these sort of other people have been identified. So it turns out that the Terran colonists are in fact infected. And the Earth Force officer, General Thompson, wants their logs uploaded to the Excalibur to see if they've been in contact with anyone else, and then erased. And Gideon resolves to find out why he wants those logs erased, because he thinks there's something fishy about it. So Chambers then tells him that there's some sort of cyber-organic compound in the colonist's blood. So Gideon is now definitely interested in what's really going on. So we see that Gideon has some sort of special access to classified information, and he proceeds to use that to dig a little bit deeper. The leader of the tribe that Dorina has found explains that, based on the memories and the stories that have been passed down to her, they were on a ship that was the first to take their people off planet to use them as workers on this new planet. But they were assaulted, and we see this on screen, they were assaulted by not just one shadow ship, but 3 shadow ships, 3 shadow mothership vessels. That's very unusual. The ship that they were on doesn't appear to be anything special. So I'm now kind of wondering, why on earth did the Shadows send 3 ships against this seemingly not particularly, militaristic, heavily armoured ship? And I also wonder exactly when that happened, because the way it's put suggests to me that they've had a sort of colony going for, maybe several generations on this planet. Not that it's huge, but I actually wonder whether this took place in the previous Shadow War, when there would have been more Shadow vessels active, perhaps, than was the case in Sheridan's Shadow War. So I'm definitely curious about what the backstory there is, and it is a full-on Shadow assault, because we see Shadow fighters as well, possibly packing more firepower than they should as well, actually, thinking about it. But essentially, the Darina's people's ship gets shredded, but they do get the escape pods off, and clearly some of those escape pods made it to the planet, made landfall, but they were left without comms. There was no way of contacting their homeworld, and of course, as a result, they don't know that their homeworld has since been destroyed during the most recent Shadow War. So it's an interesting point of backstory for Darina's people there, which I don't think we ever find out more about, unfortunately, during the course of the series. But again, it was one of these sort of potential plot points that could have been picked up had it managed to keep going. So meanwhile, Dr. Chambers has been sent to investigate the waste system on the colonist ship by Gideon, because he thinks there's something afoot here. And she comments, and strangely, she's wearing a full environmental suit. I have no idea why, unless it's because she's digging through waste which the nanovirus shield wouldn't protect her from. It's kind of odd, because she is actually going through this waste looking for traces of the Drac Plague. And apparently she passed on getting aboard a science vessel called the Olympus in order to take on this mission, because it was more sort of heroic and honourable and all that sort of good stuff. And now she's digging through rubbish, is the politest term I can use, looking for signs of the plague. And she does find it, but the strange thing is that she finds it in a sealed food ration, which in theory shouldn't be possible, because how would it have got off Earth in an infected state if it was in a sort of sealed food ration? And it turns out that these rations are made by a corporation called Crusade, and the working hypothesis is that the food packs were actually infected on purpose, because that's the only way that it could actually have happened. And Gideon goes to speak to Allison about that, and apparently it's the first time he's ever gone to Allison's quarters. And Allison says that it is a powerful corporation with a lot of reach. And basically, if you did trifle with them or challenge them in any way, you'd be 6 feet under fairly rapidly. So back on the planet, Darina is still talking with the leader of the group, and she explains that of the 1,000 people that were on the ship, only 100 actually survived to the surface, and they've kept alive their culture and their respect for the stones, which is, I think, their sort of system of prophecy. And but Darina has to tell them that Xander Prime, their homeworld, is dead. So they are the last of their species, the last of their race at this point, as far as she's aware. And Darina and Dr. Chambers have a fairly heavy-duty standoff when they go outside the cave and the cliff where the colony is sheltering, because the doctor is saying she's going to have to report this to Gideon. And Darina is adamant that they are not going to be taken off planet, basically, and she feels that if Earth Force find out, Earth Force will want to get them off the planet. And whether or not this is their original home, it's their home now, and she isn't having that. And she will basically hold the doctor personally responsible if her people are messed with. So it's quite funny, the height difference between the two is very, very noticeable. Darina looks tiny compared to Dr. Chambers. So but you do get the distinct impressions that she would probably be able to take her. So after that's happened, we find that Dr. Chambers is actually being stalked by Tim. And it turns out that she's got a land speeder nearby, which is what she used to get up to the colonists. Well, you know, the Dorina's colonists, and we will see more of those later in the series. And but basically, this chap tracks her down, stalks her effectively, and pins her with what he explains are cybernetic arms, which aren't very pressure sensitive. So he apologises in advance if he crushes her. Therefore, it might be best if she didn't sort of wriggle too much. But Dorina has heard her shout and tries to rescue her, but doesn't have much joy, unfortunately. And the Doctor is quickly recaptured, and although she tried to contact the ship, she has to tell the ship that actually everything's okay because she's got a cybernetic hand around her throat. So not the best rescue effort ever. So back on the ship, we see that Gideon has managed to access Robert Black's Earth Force records, and he's cross-referenced him with General Thompson. And interestingly, he was a Gropos, so he was a ground pounder. He was present at the Battle of the Line, and he was given the Medal of Honor in 2248, but he's now listed as AWOL. And apparently he was, prior to that, he was transferred to a bioweapons division. So it seems that General Thompson was actually in charge of this program, which eventually got wound up for whatever reason, perhaps because it was deemed sort of, you know, untoward at home. And so it seems likely that what Thompson is after is a cover-up, basically. He's trying to keep quiet that these people even existed and were sort of upgraded. So the Doctor is kidnapped, and Tim puts her on the colonist ship, intending to take off with her as a hostage. But the difficulty is that he's infected by the Drac Plague. She isn't, but her virus screen is only good for another few hours. So Gideon is obviously concerned that she not be left exposed beyond that point, otherwise she'll be in trouble. So we then see that, you know, sort of ultimatums are exchanged between him and Tim, and we see then from the planet, Dorina and Black are having a sort of a conversation and having a bit of a sort of a heart to heart, because, you know, it's clear that Black wants to protect his people, and he's lost his love as a result of one of the experiments that were done on him going wrong. And, you know, Dorina obviously wants to look after her people as well. So they both want the same thing, but they just happen to have been brought together by the circumstances of their positions, and of course the Drac Plague situation. So there's then a sort of a bright light that lights up the ground, and as they both look up, we can see sort of multiple destinations shooting across the night sky, which suggests that there's been a firefight in orbit, and logically the colonist ship will not have come off best against the Excalibur. So Dorina and Gideon go back up to orbit in a shuttle, and she wants to know how Gideon found out about the cybernetics, and basically she wants a secret for a secret, because you know, if he's going to keep the presence of her people there a secret, then she wants some sort of leverage to ensure that he keeps his word. So he explains to her that he found out about the cybernetics by virtue of having won someone's passcodes in a rather sort of drunken game of probably sort of poker or similar, which we've seen him play before. And he's been very careful not to compromise that person, but from time to time he does dip into classified files that he wouldn't otherwise have access to, and that's how he was able to cross-reference Thompson and the bioweapons division and what was done with the colonists to augment them. So now they're both sort of even Stevens, and he does say to her that basically everyone lies sometimes, no one ever tells the whole truth all the time. So she shouldn't really be that surprised that he does that too. But she does recognise that he's a bit of more of a loose cannon than perhaps a lot of captains would be. but he says, that's just who he is, basically. So he's not really making any apologies for that, which is fair enough. And that seems to give her some comfort. And he also suggests that perhaps she ought to apologise for her sort of outburst earlier to Dr. Chambers. And she acknowledges that she ought to do that, perhaps. So Alison tells Chambers that he knows about Doreena's people, and she's really abrupt with him. So she clearly doesn't have much time for him, and she accuses him of having a wallet for a heart, basically, that he just wants to claim that he found them so that he gets bonus points with IPX. So she's pretty adamant that, that's her call to make, not his, basically. But it's not clear whether or not he's really going to abide by that, because as far as we're aware, his ego is such that he wouldn't particularly prioritise her wishes over his own, but we'll see. So when Dorina goes to apologise to Chambers has to give her some bad news at the same time, and that is that whilst everyone on Earth has sort of maybe 5 years to last, having been infected, for whatever reason, Dorina's people are more susceptible to the plague, so they only actually have 1 year. So she's forced to agree with Dorina that they now really do need to redouble their efforts, because otherwise Dorina's people are the first ones who are going to suffer as a result of having been infected by the colonists. And we also discover in the meantime that the colonists have survived, because what happened was that Gideon fed the information about the cybernetics program and their sort of betrayal by Thompson to them whilst they were chasing them down. So they left the ship before Excalibur blew up and before Gideon communicated that fact to Thompson, who was then satisfied that the loose end had been cleaned up. And the arrangement is that they will leave a satellite in orbit, and that satellite will both warn people off the planet on the basis that the fauna's been infected by the plague, so it's now tainted, so they shouldn't go anywhere near it. But by the same token, the satellite will also monitor to make sure that, not that they have a ship anymore, mind you, but they will also monitor to make sure that none of Black's crew tried to get off the planet. So that's the deal, basically. So they now presumably will also have the sort of 5-year clock ticking, but there's no one else on the planet who isn't already infected, so they're not at risk of infecting anyone else. And Gideon is happy with that situation, and he's happy that he's put one over on Thompson effectively, because he doesn't particularly like his style, it seems. So all's well that ends well on that front. And finally we see that Alison is recording a log for IPX as he's been told he needs to, because he's behind. But whilst he does initially record a log that would have given up at least the implication that there was someone else on the planet who they might want to investigate, ultimately he doesn't do that. So he does delete that log, so he has kept the secret of Dorina's people being there, as Chambers suggested that he might like to do. So that's it in terms of the actual overall episode plot. And I like some of the callbacks. I like the fact that Black was a Gropos. Now, the guy who played Robert Black had a really familiar face to me. I'm actually just scrolling through Internet Movie Database now, trying to figure out where I've seen him before. And bizarrely, it might even have been in Mortal Kombat, of all things. He's even been in the Orville, apparently. I'm just having a quick look through, because there's definitely something that was really sort of bugging me about what else he's been in that I remember him from. Maybe it was Mortal Kombat. I don't know. He was in Star Trek Enterprise, Admiral Valdor. I'm not sure. Oh, that's right. Yeah, he was the Romulan guy, wasn't he? He was the Romulan guy in the drone episodes. That might be where I remember him from. Because I've probably seen little clips of that relatively recently. He's been in all sorts, actually. He's been in Charmed, The X-Files, The Alien Bounty Hunter and X-Files, of course. Yeah. Oh, it's all coming back to me, yes. That all makes total sense. 7 Days, Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Yeah, made up. Yeah, he's been quite a few little odds and ends, actually. In Star Trek Generations, he was a Klingon Helm officer, apparently. Good grief. Okay. Yeah, so just one of those little quirks. I just knew that I knew that I recognised his face. He's played a few Klingons, actually. Even in Alien Nation as well. Which again, I saw that recently. I was in Street Hawk, brilliant. And he was in the Terminator as well. He was a punk in the Terminator in 1984, apparently. God, he was in Street Hawk and Knight Rider. Funny. Good. So what do I think of this as an episode overall? I like the fact there's a little mention of Sheridan in it. I like the fact that there's a mention of the Battle of the Line. In terms of him, Black, being there. I don't know what he would have been, because if he was just a Marine, I'm not quite sure why he would have been on Battle of the Line. Although we do see people who have multiple skill sets, like Garibaldi, because Garibaldi was a security officer, but he could also fly a Star Fury. So it's not out with the realms of possibility that he could also pilot a fighter or something similar. So that makes perfect sense. But I like the fact that we've got those little callbacks in this episode. I think that makes perfect sense. To sort of, in terms of universe building. It's good that we've actually got an episode where we're addressing the fact that obviously the plague could potentially get off Earth. At the end of the day, lots of people have ships. People could break a blockade. They could, go in and get out again. So that may be something that we see again. Is quite possible. It's nice in the sense that we don't have Galen in this episode. We've had quite a lot of Galen of late, in this play order at least, and we see sort of Dorina and Gideon sort of bonding a little bit in this episode as well, which is nice to see. Again, there's rather a lot of Gideon kind of sitting around and talking to screens and stuff like that. It still feels like we don't really know that much about him personally. We see Matheson only very, very briefly this episode. Get to know a little bit more about Eilison, a little bit more about Dr. Chambers, maybe. Not a huge amount, but at least they've actually got sort of somewhat active roles in these episodes. And we also get a very clear indication that IPX are still very involved in what he's doing day to day. So he's clearly still got corporate obligations that they're keen to see him fulfill. And I guess there's got to be a question mark there of whether or not his corporate obligations will ever conflict with the primary mission that they're trying to achieve. Although, logically, if IPX are headquartered on Earth, they'd be quite keen for him to achieve his mission. But as we know from the series, IPX have fingers in many, many pies and are always very, very keen to get their hands on any sort of alien tech that they can. So he is clearly always going to have a bit of a sort of a mental subplot going on in terms of his corporate standing as well as the mission itself. So yeah, I mean, I think it's a good episode. It's a solid episode, and it is one of those episodes where, as I've said before, it does make you wonder how much more interesting the series would have gotten over time as they developed it once they found their stride. I mean, this was production order 110, so although for some reason I remember seeing this quite early doors when I was first watching the series on Channel 4 in the UK, it feels like a lot of these episodes on the DVD were actually produced later in the series. But we're sort of seeing them early in the series. So I'm not quite sure why that is, unless we've just sort of they just happen to be produced in that order, and that's why we're seeing them come out in that order in terms of this viewing order. But it's definitely dotting around far more than Babylon 5 ever did in terms of the production order and the viewing order. So it's I can see why there's so much confusion in that there's only 13 episodes, and yet you can get so many different orders depending on how you're choosing to come at it. But I think that's probably about it for this one. There's nothing else to particularly note. I mean, it still makes me smile that we're in the sort of 2200s and the shuttles still land on landing gear. You'd think they'd have come up with a better sort of vertical takeoff system for the standard Earth-Force shuttle by now, because when you ever actually going to have a runway for them to land on if they're going to random alien planets? It's kind of odd. I'm pretty sure that, in fact, it's even odder when you consider they can land vertically. So if they can land vertically, why not just give them little skids or something so they just land, then take off vertically, and then fly off vertically? Transitioning from vertical to horizontal. But anyway, I don't know. It's just a choice, isn't it? I guess it's like we're used to seeing landing gear on space shuttles, so that they've kind of taken that approach to it. But anyway, a debate for the comments perhaps as to what the appropriate form of undercarriage ought to be for a sort of orbit to ground sort of vessel. I don't know. So I think I'm going to leave it there because I'm just really waffling now, aren't I? So I shall. I'm nearly. How many episodes have I done now? So that's 5, and I've only got 13. So I'm not doing too badly really when all's said and done. But I'll try and keep this sort of weekly pace up, and then I should be done fairly soon. And there's now only about a week to go before I get the road home to have a look at. So that's going to be interesting because I'm not sure if I can do screenshots off that, because I did get a copyright claim on my use of the trailer, which I did kind of think was going to happen, I must admit. But I didn't get a strike for it. It was just a claim, so that's okay. But yeah, so that'll be out shortly. So I'll actually have new Babylon 5 to watch, which will be exciting. Not that this isn't quite new to me, because I haven't watched this for however long. But I'm definitely liking Crusade, because I think that by its nature it just has more freedom than Babylon 5 had, by virtue of it being set on a station. Inevitably, you were bound to get that many more bottle shows as compared with something that is set on a ship. But what's really interesting is that we're dealing here with a show that started on a station, then moved to a ship, whereas Star Trek started on a ship and then once moved to a station. So Babylon 5 has managed to do it in reverse. So it's established its universe through the station, and then used a ship to start exploring the universe more, which is really, really interesting. And on that thought, I shall leave you. So as ever, do please like and subscribe, and I will see you for the next one. Cheers for now.